The blade was already raised. I could hear it in the silence. That particular hell-breath quiet that only happens when 100 people are watching someone die, and none of them plan to stop it. My knees were on cold stone. My wrists were bound behind my back with rope that had cut through to bone 2 days ago. I couldn't feel my hands anymore. My name is Lin Zhao. I am 26 years old. I am a physician. And in 30 seconds, I am going to be a dead physician. That's the part that still doesn't make sense to me. Even now, with the executioner's shadow falling across my neck, I cannot work out how I ended up here. Actually, wait, I can work it out. I know exactly how I ended up here. It started with a patient I couldn't save. 3 months ago, I was a physician's apprentice at the Wuyuan Prefecture Hospital. Not the most prestigious post, but I was good. Better than good. I diagnosed things the senior doctors missed. I treated patients the others had written off. I used methods that were unconventional, but they worked. Then came the night that destroyed everything. A regional official named Feng Chao brought in his son. 17 years old, high fever, rash, spreading outward from the chest. I recognized it immediately. Scarlet fever. Treatable. I prescribed the correct herbs, the right dosage, proper rest. Senior physician Ho overruled me on the spot. He called it wind illness and ordered a bleeding treatment instead. I argued loudly in front of the patient's father. That was my mistake, not the diagnosis. The argument. Feng Chao's son died 4 days later. From the wrong treatment, not the illness. If they had listened to me, the boy would have walked out of that hospital on his own feet. Instead, Feng Chao had me arrested, charged with practicing beyond my authorization, contaminating an approved treatment plan, and causing the death of a noble's son through reckless incompetence. The verdict came back in a single afternoon. Death. To be carried out at the main square of Wuyuan Prefecture on the morning of the 3rd day of the water month. That morning was today. The executioner cleared his throat. Imperial procedure. One final signal before the strike. I closed my eyes, and then someone behind me screamed. Not a scream of horror, a scream of announcement. Halt! Imperial pardon. By order of the Eastern Governor's Office, the execution of Lin Zhao is suspended pending reassignment. I felt the shadow of the blade shift. I heard boots hammer across stone. Someone grabbed me by the collar and hauled me upright, and I swayed on legs that had forgotten how to hold weight. There was a woman standing in front of me. She was maybe 30 years old, short, compact, dressed in a gray traveling cloak. She held an imperial scroll in her left hand and a horse's reins in her right, like she had just ridden hard to get here and hadn't bothered to hand the horse off. Her face was calm, professionally calm, in the way that is more unsettling than any expression of emotion. Lin Zhao, she said. Not a question. What's left of him, I said. Something crossed her face. I could name it. Not pity, not sympathy, something more deliberate than either. She unrolled the scroll and read aloud. By the authority of First Magistrate Chun Bao of the Eastern Governance Division, the condemned Lin Zhao is hereby pardoned of his execution, sentence, and reassigned to active imperial service in Ashwood Village, Outer Yanhai District. Service term, indefinite. Conditions of pardon. The condemned must remain within the quarantine boundary of Ashwood Village, treat the afflicted population to the best of his abilities, and submit weekly reports to the Eastern Governance Division. Failure to comply, or any attempt to breach the quarantine perimeter, will result in immediate execution by the soldiers stationed on the line. She rolled the scroll shut. Do you understand? She asked. I was just about to lose my head, I said slowly. And now I'm being sent to a plague village. Instead, yes. And if I try to leave the plague village, I get executed. Correct. I thought about this. So I'm either going to die of plague, I said, or I die by execution. Or, she said, and just for a moment something flickered in her expression that might almost have been amusement. You could try treating the patients. She handed the scroll to an official nearby, gave me one final unreadable look, and walked back to her horse. She mounted and rode north without once looking back. I still didn't know her name. I really should have asked. An imperial cart took me northeast for 6 hours. No blanket. No food. My wrists still bound, now an iron instead of rope. The two soldiers driving the car didn't speak to me. They spoke to each other in the clipped, abbreviated way of men who've driven this road many times and stopped finding it interesting. I had nothing to do but think. Ashwood Village. I knew the name. Most physicians in the prefecture did. 3 months ago, a report had circulated about an outbreak of something the provincial office was calling wasting lung fever in the outer Yanhai district. Symptoms: respiratory distress, skin pallor, vomiting, progressive muscle weakness. Fatal in most cases within 3 to 5 weeks of onset. The provincial office had sealed the village immediately. Quarantined soldiers on all 4 approach roads. No one in, no one out. They had sent 2 imperial physicians in during the first week. Both died within a month. After that, the provincial office stopped sending physicians. The official report said the village was receiving ongoing medical assessment. What that actually meant was that nobody wanted to go, and they had stopped pretending otherwise. Now, they were sending a disgraced criminal who had been 6 seconds from execution. I thought about that woman's face as she read the scroll. The way her eyes never left mine for the entire reading. Not the nervous glance of someone delivering bad news. The fixed, steady look of someone delivering very specific information and watching carefully to see if you understood it. I had been too shaken to analyze it at the time. Now, bouncing along a rutted road in chains, I had nothing else to do. Something about that look bothered me. I've said no why yet. The cart stopped at sunset. One soldier unlocked my wrists. The other pointed down a narrow path. Through a pine forest. Walk straight. Don't stop. The quarantine line is 100 yards in. Soldiers will confirm your papers. After that, you're on your own. He handed me a sack. I looked inside. A knife. Some rope. A fire-starting kit. A small pouch of copper coins. Nothing medical. No herbs. No instruments. Nothing. You're not giving me medicine? I said. The soldiers looked at each other. We were told to bring you to the line, one said. I'm going into a plague village as a physician. With no medicine. Those are our orders. I looked at the sack. Then, at the dark tree line ahead of me. Fine, I said. I picked up the sack and walked into the forest. Smelled Ashwood Village before I saw it. Not the smell of death. That's what people expect from a plague village. It was the smell of smoke, wet earth, and something underneath both of them. Something mineral and sharp like old metal. Left to sit in standing water. The quarantine soldiers at the perimeter were young, edgy, and obviously terrified. They confirmed my papers with trembling hands and waved me through without once making eye contact. I didn't blame them. Standing this close to a sealed plague zone on an indefinite rotation would break anyone's nerve. I walked through the tree line and Ashwood opened up in front of me. It had been a village of maybe 200 households. Or it had been once. The layout was still there. Rows of low buildings along 3 main streets. A market square. A well at the center. But the living quality of the place was completely gone. No fires and hearths. No children in the streets. No sound except wind moving through wood. On every few houses, a red strip of cloth was nailed to the doorframe. Sickness inside. I counted them on the first street alone. 23. I found a physician's post without much trouble. It was the only building with a lamp burning. A low, one-room structure near the center of the village that someone had converted into a treatment space. Sleeping mats on the floor. 8 patients lying on them, covered in thin blankets. And one person moving between them with the efficient, unhurried motion of someone who has been doing this alone for a very long time and has completely stopped expecting help. She was maybe 28, medium height. Her hair was pinned back tightly with what I realized was a surgical needle because she'd used everything else as an actual surgical needle. Her hands kept moving even while she looked up at me, checking a pulse, repositioning a patient to prevent pressure sores, both at once without pausing. Who are you? She said flatly. Lin Zhao. Imperial reassignment. Physician. She looked me over the way a physician examines a patient's face before asking what's wrong. Precise, diagnostic, not unkind but not gentle either. You're the condemned prisoner, she said. The pardoned physician, I said. Pardoned and sent here. Same thing. She turned back to her patient. The last imperial physician. They sent lasted 11 days. Before that, 9 days. What happened to them? They got sick. Then they died. She unwrapped a bandage from an old man's forearm and examined what was underneath. Skin lesions, unusually patterned. And you've been here how long? This is my first hour, I said. How long have you been here? 41 days. I looked at her more carefully. She wasn't sick. She looked exhausted and underfed. But she showed none of the pallor or respiratory symptoms I had been briefed about. Why aren't you showing symptoms? I said. She glanced at me sideways. Quick, the glance of someone deciding something. Because I figured out something the other physicians didn't, she said. Which is? She didn't answer right away. She finished re-bandaging the old man. Moved to the next patient. What supplies did they send with you? She finally said. A knife, rope, a fire kit, and some coins. She stopped completely. She turned around and looked at me with an expression I would come to recognize as her version of fury, almost identical to her neutral face, except for something very cold that appeared behind her eyes. They sent a physician to a plague village, she said carefully, with a knife and rope, and a fire kit. Leave, she said. I can't. The quarantine soldiers will execute me. Then find a corner and stay out of my way. You'll probably be dead in 2 weeks anyway. I looked at the 8 patients on the floor. I looked at her. I looked at the near-empty shelf of medicine behind her. What's your name? I said. A long pause. Mei Shu, she said. I was an imperial physician. 3rd rank. Was stripped of my credentials 8 months ago for falsifying a treatment report. Did you? Yes, she said. Immediately. No hosetashchen. I falsified it to show that the deputy minister of grains brother had received proper care. He had received no care at all because I refused to treat him. He had beaten his servants to death. I don't treat people who beat their servants to death. She adjusted a patient's blanket. The ministry stripped my credentials and gave me a choice between prison and voluntary quarantine service. I chose this. Don't look like that. I'm not a martyr. I thought I could contain this outbreak faster. What is this outbreak? I said. The provincial reports say wasting lung fever. But those lesions. I walked the room. 8 patients. I crouched next to each one in turn. Pull back blankets. Check skin, eyes, nails, mouths. Asked Mei Shu to describe the progression in each case when symptoms first appeared, how fast they moved, what helped, what didn't. She answered every question without emotion, in precise clinical detail. Patient histories. Memorized because she had run out of paper 2 weeks ago. I was on my 5th patient, a middle-aged man with pronounced yellowing at the whites of his eyes. When something happened that I cannot explain and have long since stopped trying to explain. A sound, not external, internal, like a bell struck at the very center of my skull. And then text, floating across my vision like words on a page only I could see. Reckoning system, activation detected. User, Lin Zhao. Status, active quarantine. Zone, lives in immediate danger. 8. System function. The reckoning system tracks lives saved and lives lost within the user's zone of operation. Each life saved earns reckoning points. Each life lost deducts points. Points unlock medical knowledge, supplies, and tools from an advanced archive. Current points, 0. Warning. If points reach -20, the user enters critical penalty status. I blinked. The text faded. I sat very still for a moment. 8 lives in danger. 0 points. No supplies. And a system had just informed me that if I failed, enough people, something very bad would happen to me personally. I took a slow breath. One problem at a time. I finished my examination of all 8 patients and stood up. Mei Shu was watching me with her arms crossed, in the precise posture of someone who has been the most competent person in every room they've entered for years and is deeply skeptical that this is about to change. Well, she said, None of these patients have lung fever, I said. She said nothing. The respiratory symptoms are secondary, I said. The yellowing in patient 5's eyes, the pattern of the lesions, the way the weakness moves from the extremities inward instead of outward, and the smell in this building, that sharp metallic quality under the smoke. This isn't a contagion. It's a poisoning. Silence. Arsenic, I said. Long-term arsenic exposure through the water supply. That's why it presents differently in each patient. Severity depends on how much water each person consumed and for how long. That's why it doesn't spread between people. That's why your quarantine isn't protecting anyone. There's nothing to quarantine. The poison is in the well. Mei Shu went very still. I tested the well water. Week 2. Using every testing method I had available, which were observation, taste, smell, none of which would detect arsenic at these concentrations. I was already moving to the door. I need to see the well. How do you know about arsenic poisoning? Her voice stopped me. Not accusatory. Genuinely curious, in the precise way a physician gets when they encounter knowledge outside expected scope. That's not in the standard imperial medical curriculum. I stopped at the door. I studied on my own, I said, which was true, also incomplete, because I had once been a different person with a different body of knowledge, and none of that fit easily into a conversation with a skeptical colleague in a dying village. The smell, she said slowly, more to herself than to me. I noted it. I just didn't have the reference point, I said. You'd never encountered arsenic poisoning before. I had. A long pause. The well, she said. The well. I agreed. She grabbed her cloak. Scene 5. The well. The village well sat at the center of the market square. Stone structure. 20 feet deep. Old enough that the inner walls were thick with decades of mineral deposit. We knelt at the edge, and I lowered a bucket. The reckoning system pulsed again. Medical knowledge unlocked. Arsenic contamination. Identification. Source tracing. Then at me. Go, she said. No. Performance of bitterness or disappointment. Just clear, quiet understanding, which somehow felt a great deal worse than anger would have. I'm sorry, I said. Don't apologize. Just go. I went. Vivian was in the back seat of her car outside a luxury retail complex, furious about a limited edition bag that another customer had arrived first and purchased before her. I stood in the store for 40 minutes while store management negotiated a resolution to her satisfaction. On the walk back to the car, without warning, Vivian held out her open hand. Give me your phone, she said. I looked at her. Why? Because I want to see what was so important that you were unavailable on a Sunday. I was off duty on my scheduled day off. Marcus, give me the phone. There were 100 things I should have done in that one moment. Instead, I handed it to her because 10 years had worn the resistance in me down to almost nothing. She went through it in under 30 seconds. Read the entire message thread with Clara. Saw the dating application. Looked back up at me with an expression I had genuinely never seen on her face before. Something that sat exactly between cold fury and something rawer and much harder to hold eye contact with. You made a dating profile, she said. Yes. You went on a date during your time off. Yes. And you've arranged to go on another one. Yes. The silence inside the car was the specific kind that happens immediately before something permanent changes and cannot be taken back. You belong to this family, Marcus. Her voice had dropped very low. You have belonged to this family for 10 complete years. What exactly are you imagining you are doing? Ms. Zhao, I said. My contract expires in 3 months. I'm planning to resign when it does. She looked at me for an extended moment. Then she said, no, you're not, and handed me back my phone. For the next 9 days, I was in every meaningful, practical sense. Treatment protocols. Supplies incoming. Telation bones. Ordered. Treatment compound. Water purification tablets. A light pressure appeared at my side. I reached into my sack and my hand closed around things. that had not been there before. Glass vials, a small wrap package. I didn't pull them out in front. A Meishu. Not yet. The bucket came up, crystal clear. No color, no odor, no cloudiness. Which was exactly the problem with arsenic. It doesn't announce itself. What are you looking for? Meishu said. Something to react with. Give me anything with strong alkaline content. Would ash from the fire. Pit. She went to the treatment building and returned with a handful of ash. I mixed a small amount into a cup of the water, stirred, and held it to the late afternoon light. The water turned the faintest, almost imperceptible shade of yellow-gray. Meishu stared at it. That's not a standard test, she said. No, but combined with the symptom pattern, the lesion distribution, the eye yellowings. Enough for me. I set the cup down. How long has the village relied on this well exclusively? The eastern spring dried up during the drought. Maybe 45, 50 days ago. Everyone shifted to this one, and the sickness began roughly 40 days ago. Her face changed in a way I hadn't seen before. Within the first few days of switching water sources, she said, yes. A long silence. If you're right, she said slowly, then no one in this village has a disease. They have a contaminated water source that we have been treating as a plague for 6 weeks, while the imperial office maintained the quarantine walls. Yes. Why, she said. Not rhetorical. A physician's question. The most important question in medicine. Now what is wrong? Why is it wrong? I didn't have the answer yet, but the reckoning system quietly in the back of my mind was beginning to calculate one. Treatment started that night. I explained the plan to Meishu as we worked. Chelation therapy. Binding agents that attach to arsenic in the patient's blood and clear it through the kidneys. It would take weeks, but it would work. Her skepticism was professional and precise. She had never heard of chelation. The compounds I was pulling from my sack, which I described as family medical knowledge passed down through generations, were unlike anything in the standard pharmacopoeia. She tested the liquid in each vial herself before permitting me to administer anything. She found nothing wrong with them. I don't understand what these are, she said. They work, I said. For now, that has to be enough. We started with the 2 most critical patients, the old man with the lesions and the young woman, whose name I learned was Xiaoli, 17 years old, daughter of the village grain merchant. I administered each dose carefully, talking both patients through what I was doing even though they could barely track my words. It mattered. I had learned that somewhere in the past I couldn't fully account for. It mattered that a patient knew what was being done to them. It gave them something to hold on to. 3 hours later, Xiaoli's breathing had eased. Meishu was checking her pulse and went completely still, then checked again. Her rhythm is stabilizing, she said. I had expected it, but hearing it out loud still hit me somewhere in the chest. The system tallied it quietly. Reckoning points, +1. The old man next, I said. By the middle of the night, 3 of the 8 patients showed measurable improvement. Meishu didn't speak for a long time after the 3rd one. She sat on the floor with her back against the wall, working through everything in her head. 41 days of failure being rebuilt through a new understanding of what had actually been happening. The grief of it and the relief. Arriving together. The other patients in the village, she said eventually. The ones in their houses with red cloth on the doors. We need to treat all of them and stop them using the well. I know. And we need to understand why the well was contaminated in the first place. She looked at me levelly. Natural contamination is possible, she said. Yes, but unlikely given the timing. And given that the provincial office sealed this village and then sent us no functional supplies and told us to keep treating for lung fever. We looked at each other across the candlelit room. We need someone who knows this village, she said. Someone who has been here long enough to know what changed before the sickness began. That was when we heard the knock point, 3 sharp knocks. A pause. 2 more. Meishu was on her feet before I could move. She went to the wall and picked up a long medicine pestle that I now realized she had positioned there specifically for use as a weapon. Who's there? She said. Someone bringing food, said a woman's voice from outside. Or I was until I heard voices in here. There aren't supposed to be voices in here. Meishu looked at me. I nodded. She moved and I opened the door. The woman in the doorway was carrying 2 large bundles on her back and had a short blade on. Her belt that she wasn't reaching for, but was absolutely aware of. She was maybe 35 with a face that had been weathered into something harder and more interesting than it had started as. Behind her, barely visible in the dark, stood 2 more women, similarly loaded. She looked at me without expression. You're not the imperial physician. He is, in a manner of speaking, Meishu said behind me. The woman's gaze moved to Meishu. Something shifted in her face. Not warmth exactly. Relief. Held very carefully. You're still alive? Good. I was concerned when we didn't see your lamp for 3 nights. The oil ran out. Hu Yen, you brought rice. Rice, salted fish, dried vegetables, and medicine from a trader 3 days east. She began, unloading with practiced efficiency. Tell me about the newcomer. Lin Zhao, I said. Imperial reassignment. They finally sent someone. She glanced at me briefly. What took them 6 weeks? I think, I said, they were hoping no one would have to come at all. Hu Yin paused for just a moment, then kept unloading without comment. Over the next hour, I learned who she was. Her name was Hu Yin. Born in a village 4 days' walk from Ashwood. 3rd daughter of a grain farmer. Married young. Her husband was conscripted into the Imperial Army 8 years ago. She received 1 letter in 8 years, and then nothing. 3 years ago, she stopped waiting and started moving. She had organized the Widow's Covenant, a network of women throughout the outer Yanhai district whose husbands had been conscripted and never came home. 23 women at first, now more than 70. They didn't fight anyone. They didn't make political demands. They moved supplies. They found communities in hardship, flood-damaged settlements, drought-stricken farms, sealed quarantine zones, and they brought resources from outside. Ow, I said, the quarantine soldiers. Watch the roads. They don't watch the northern ridge after midnight. She sorted herbs with quick, confident hands. Meishu has been keeping this village alive on what we bring her. The Imperial office sends nothing. The quarantine troops have orders to turn away all supply carts. Orders from whom? First Magistrate Chun Bao's office. She said it without looking up. He oversees the outer Yanhai district. All quarantine authority in this zone reports to him. A cold thread moved through my chest. Jian Bao, the name on my pardon scroll. The official who had pulled me off an execution block and sent me here. Why would the first magistrate obstruct medical supplies to a plague village inside his own jurisdiction? I said. The words came out careful and measured. I was already thinking past the question. Hu Yin looked up at me for the first time with something that wasn't quite suspicion and wasn't quite trust. The look of someone deciding how much to say to a stranger. I don't know, she said, but something in her eyes said she had a guess. The next morning, we began telling people to stop using the well. This was not simple. Ashwood had been under quarantine for 6 weeks. The people here were exhausted, frightened, and had long since stopped trusting anyone who arrived carrying official documents. A new physician showing up to say the water was poison sounded from where they stood, exactly like every other imperial notice that had turned out to mean nothing. The first family slammed the door in my face. The second sent a teenager out to tell me they handled their own affairs. The third opened the door and looked at me with flat, hollow eyes and said, "My mother died here 10 days ago. My wife is sick inside. Tell me one reason I should listen to anything an imperial man says." I didn't have a good answer for that. The empire had failed this man repeatedly and personally. I was here in an official capacity, which made me their representative. I couldn't undo what had been done, so I told him the truth instead. I'm not here because the empire cares about your village. I'm here because I was going to be executed, and this was the alternative. I don't represent anything except my own intention to keep people alive because it's the only thing I know how to do. Your wife is sick. Let me look at her. If I can't help, you've lost nothing. If I can, you get her back. He stared at me for a long time. Then he opened the door. His wife was in the middle stage of contamination. I treated her with chelation compounds and explained every step in plain language, not physician's vocabulary, not imperial procedure. I gave him information, not orders. I treated him like a man. He listened. Then he called his neighbor. Word moved through Ashwood the way news always moves in small communities. Person to person, gathering weight as it travels. By afternoon, I had a line outside the treatment building. Who? Lien's women managed the flow, bringing patients in order of severity. Meishu worked alongside me without discussion. We divided the cases instinctively, the most critical to me because I had the chelation compounds, the moderate cases to her with the herbal treatments she had refined over 6 weeks. We didn't talk much. We didn't need to. The system kept its quiet count. By sundown of the second day, I had treated 21 patients. 12 were showing measurable improvement. Hu Yin organized clean water from a mountain spring 3 miles north through a ridge path her women had been using for weeks. We set up a rotation. Her people carried it in overnight. We distributed during the day. On the third morning, Shally walked out of the treatment building under her own power. She stood in the early light and turned her face upward, and the expression on her face was so raw and private that I looked away to give it to her. Meishu was standing next to me. That's the first person I've watched recover in this village, she said quietly. There'll be more, I said. A pause. How are you doing this? She wasn't looking at me. She was still watching Shally. The compounds. The knowledge. I have studied medicine for 12 years. I have never encountered any of this. I told you. It's inherited. Lin Zhao. She said my name the way she might set a scalpel down. Flat, final stop. I'm not asking about your supply chain. I'm asking whether you're what you appear to be. I thought about that. No, I said honestly. I'm not. She nodded slowly, like she had already reached this conclusion and was simply confirming it. As long as it keeps working, she said. She walked back inside. On the 5th day, we found the girl. Well, the girl found us. I was in the cellar of the treatment building, taking stock of my remaining compounds, when I heard something that didn't belong. Breathing. Behind a far wall. I put my hand flat against the stone and felt what I wouldn't have noticed if I weren't already attuned to respiratory patterns, the faint, arrhythmic breath of someone very deliberately trying not to be heard. I know you're there, I said. I'm a physician. I'm not going to hurt you. Silence. Then a soft scraping sound. A section of the back wall swung inward on a hidden hinge, and a girl crawled out of the darkness. Maybe 16 years old. Small, with the specific, careful thinness of someone who has been managing hunger very precisely over a long period of time. She had deep ink stains on her fingers that no amount of washing had removed, and she was clutching something flat and wrapped in oilskin against her chest with both arms, the way you hold something you would rather die than lose. She looked at me with eyes that were simultaneously terrified and measuring, scared but thinking, definitely thinking. You're not from the provincial office, she said. No, I'm Lin Zhao. Who are you? Shun Xiao. How long have you been in this cellar? 33 days. I did the math. She had hidden herself here before, or just as the quarantine was fully locked down. Are you sick? I said. No, I haven't touched the main well. She pointed at the wall. I carve a channel for rainwater, just wide enough to trickle through. Now that she mentioned it, I could see the narrow groove cut into the stone with enormous patience and a very small tool. I've been surviving on what I could find down here and what people left by the crack when the physician upstairs wasn't looking. She doesn't know I'm here. Why are you hiding? She looked down at the oilskin package against her chest. Because of what I have. What do you have? Another long pause. The pause of someone who has been alone with a dangerous secret for 33 days. I did the math. She had hidden herself here before, or just as the quarantine was fully locked down. Are you sick? I said. No, I haven't touched the main well. She pointed at the wall. I carved a channel for rainwater, just wide enough to trickle through. Now that she mentioned it, I could see the narrow groove cut into the stone with enormous patience and and a very small tool. I've been surviving on what I could find down here and what people left by the crack when the physician upstairs wasn't looking. She doesn't know I'm here. Why are you hiding? She looked down at the oilskin package against her chest. Because of what I have. What do you have? Another long pause. The pause of someone who has been alone with a dangerous secret for 33 days, running the numbers on whether this stranger is worth the gamble. My father was the imperial surveyor for the outer Yinhai district, she said. He mapped everything. Roads, rivers, soil composition, mineral deposits, underground water systems, structural geology. She held the oilskin out toward me. He died 4 months ago. Before he died, he gave me these and told me to keep them safe. Told me that if anything happened, to find someone with the authority and the will to act on what they contained. I took the package carefully, unwrapped the oilskin. Inside were maps, 12 of them, hand-drawn on durable cartographer's paper in a tiny, precise hand, with measurements and notations in a surveyor's shorthand. These were detailed underground surveys of the outer Yinhai district, including Ashwood Village. I spread the central map on the cellar floor and found Ashwood. The village layout was there in fine detail, and below it, beneath the streets, beneath the well, beneath almost the entire eastern quarter of the village, was a network of subterranean structures I had no frame of reference for, until Shun Xiu crouched beside me and pointed at a notation in the corner. Zhongshui iron deposit. She read, high-grade ore, estimated extraction yield. She paused, and something changed in her voice, 600,000 gene over the first mining period. I stared at the map. Ashwood Village was sitting on top of one of the most significant iron ore deposits in the entire region, and the main village wall sat directly above the northern edge of the deposit that I called Meishu down to the cellar. I spread 3 maps and let her read them without explanation. I wanted to watch her arrive at the same conclusions independently, to verify I wasn't making a logical leap. She read in silence. Her face revealed nothing. The thinking happened entirely behind her eyes. Then she looked up. The well, she said. Yes. The arsenic isn't natural mineral seepage. It's mining runoff, she said. Someone has already begun preliminary extraction work underground. The boring operations needed to access a deposit. This deep produce arsenic-rich mineral waste. If the boring broke into the groundwater table below the well, why would anyone begin mining beneath an inhabited village without relocating the residents? First, she said, because relocating residents costs time and money. It requires official announcements, documentation. People might object. Administrators and other offices might ask questions. But if the village were already empty, then all you need is a documented reason why it's empty. A plague, a sufficiently severe outbreak that justifies both the quarantine walls and the mortality rate. No residents left to object. No living witnesses. The official record shows a tragedy. The unofficial outcome is a cleared site, ready for extraction. The cellar was very still. Shinshio had her arms wrapped around herself. My father found the deposit in his surveys 14 months ago, she said. He was required to submit the report to the first magistrate's office. I already knew what she was going to say. I had known it for the last 10 minutes. In the way you know something you don't want to know, the knowledge settling slowly into the chest like a stone. Through deep water. To First Magistrate Chunbao's office, I said. She nodded. He came home troubled after submitting it. He told my mother the magistrate's reaction had been wrong, too eager, too operational. He asked about access routes and extraction timelines before asking anything about community welfare. Her voice stayed level. 3 weeks later, my father had an accident during a survey of the northern ridge. He fell into a gorge he had surveyed 40 times in 15 years without a single incident. How long after your father's death did the contamination begin? I said, about 6 months. The preliminary boring operations to reach this depth would take 4 to 6 months to establish. Meishu had gone very quiet. Lin Zhao, she said. The provincial office. When they classified this as wasting lung fever and specified treatment protocols that any competent physician would recognize as wrong. Someone at the provincial level was cooperating, I said, or being managed. Either way, the instruction originated above the provincial level. Jian Baosha. Jurisdiction covers the provincial office. Yes. Your pardon came from Chun Bao's office. Yes. You were given no medical supplies. Yes. We looked at each other across the lamplight. He needed someone inside the quarantine. After the two imperial physicians died, the official narrative was holding but becoming fragile. If the village collapsed completely with no physician ever officially present, it would draw attention from higher authorities. Too clean, too fast. I was working it through as I spoke. But if a physician were present, a disgraced criminal, someone without political connections, someone nobody would believe if they raised objections, then the official record would show. Yes, we sent help. The physician tried. The disease was simply too severe. And when you die here, Mei Shu said, the record closes. And when I die here, I said, the record closes cleanly. Shinshio made a very small sound. I thought about the woman who had delivered my pardon at the execution block. The gray cloak. The professional calm. The one look that had bothered me from the first moment and hadn't stopped bothering me since. Not pity. Not sympathy. Not amusement. Recognition. She had looked at me like she knew exactly who I was. Like she had chosen me with a specific purpose. I reached into my sack and pulled out the imperial pardon scroll. I unrolled it now in the cellar. Lamplight. Main text. First magistrate's seal at the bottom. Standard imperial wording. But in the top right corner, where a courier's identification mark would appear, a small stamp. The seal of whoever had personally delivered this document. I recognized that seal. I had seen it somewhere else in this same cellar. My eyes moved to the corner of the map under my left hand. The surveyor's notation in the bottom margin. A secondary stamp showing who had verified the survey findings. The same seal. The same person. I looked up slowly. Mei Shu was watching me. Something in my expression told her before I spoke. What is it? She said. I showed her the pardon scroll, pointed at the courier mark, then moved my finger to the matching stamp on the survey map. She looked at both, then looked up at me, and I saw in her face, not guilt, not fear, but something more complicated. The face of a person who has been carrying something extremely heavy and has just been found out and is now calculating whether that is catastrophic or the beginning of something else entirely. Mei Shu, I said carefully, tell me exactly how you ended up in Ashwood Village. She was quiet for several seconds. I told you. I chose quarantine service over prison. The official who handled my case told me about the quarantine option. She stopped. Her jaw tightened. She was wearing a gray traveling cloak. She said she was from the 1st Magistrate's Regional Coordination Office. And the face. I said, silence. The face, I said again. The same woman who delivered your pardon, Mei Shu said. Very flat. Very controlled. I recognized at the moment old Jiang described the execution scene to me. I've been waiting for you to get there on your own. The cellar held the three of us in silence. The same woman who had placed a condemned physician into a dying village, and who had placed a disgraced physician into that same village months before him. Both of them capable, both without political protection, both placed precisely where they would find exactly this. If she worked for Chun Bao, she wouldn't have sent me, I said. The whole point was that no one capable entered this village again. Sending me undermines the containment. Unless she's not working for Chun Bao, Mei Shu said. Unless she's working against him. And we're not a cover story. We're evidence. We're the investigation. Shinshio's voice came from the corner of the cellar. Very quiet. My father described her. In his last letter, someone had contacted him privately about the survey report. Warned him to be careful. A woman in a gray traveling cloak who somehow knew what was in the report before he had officially filed it. She looked between us. He said she told him to keep the original maps safe, to make sure they reached someone who could act on them. She held up the oilskin package. He sent them to me, she said. The cellar was completely quiet. Somewhere in this empire, a woman in a gray cloak had been running a plan that none of us had, and we were part of. She had placed Mei Shu here as a long-term presence to sustain the village. She had preserved the map, evidence through a girl hiding in a cellar. And then she had timed the delivery of a condemned physician with unexpected knowledge at exactly the right moment, not to cover up a crime, to document one. But we were still inside a quarantine guarded by Chan Bao soldiers, in a village the official record believed was dying of plague. We had the evidence. We had the truth. What we didn't have was a way to get it out, or the answer to the most important question of all. Who was she? And what did she actually want from us? I rolled the pardon scroll up slowly. I looked at the maps. I looked at Mei Shu, a physician who had refused to treat a murderer and lost everything for it. I looked at Shun Xiao, a 16-year-old girl who had spent 33 days alone in a stone cellar, waiting for someone worth giving these maps to. I thought of Hu Lian, upstairs, who had kept an entire dying village alive by carrying supplies over a mountain ridge in the dark for weeks, for nothing but the conviction that it was right. Above us, 21 patients who were not dying of plague. Outside, a quarantine designed to bury them. And somewhere beyond that, a woman in a gray cloak who had been one move ahead of everyone. In this situation for over a year. She had sent me here for a reason. And I was starting to understand that the reason wasn't just to find the evidence. It was to decide what I was willing to do with it.